also what they called each other. By the way, these names, Dante invented them, and many of them have references to the towns or the families of Lucca in Navarre. In other words, Dante, the politician, sticking the knife in a little bit. They shouted. Here we go now. "O Rubicante, grip him between your claws and flay him." Now, this is interesting because at some points, let's say this for our nose, in Inferno, we have this idea that we are messing around with just shades. Almost like, you know, they're like ghosts. And then other times, like in this, we'll have very, very graphic kinds of representations of these shades as having physical bodies with muscles that can be ripped and torn and that kind of thing. Notice Dante, the poet, and the pilgrim. "Master, this wretch, who's so ill-fated and fallen into the hands of enemies, I pray you, find out who he is," I said. Going to his side at once, he asked what place he came from. "I was born," this is Capiello, "I was born," replied the shade, "in the kingdom of Navarre. My mother sent me to become the servant of a lord, for she had borne me to a rascal bent on destroying both himself and all he had." One more time that we have a sinner saying, technically it's not my fault I ended up a berater. I was born to a rascal. But notice Dante will play this game. That often, if parents don't do their job, the children grow up to themselves not being very well-mannered. Dante himself, of course, a father, right? And "for my mother sent me to become the servant of the Lord," this is again Campolo, "for she had borne me to a rascal bent on destroying both himself and all he had. Being admitted to the establishment of good King Theod's household, Theod of 1253 to 1270, I employed myself at barity." That is to say, I was a berater, right? "Which is the path I pay for in this boiling." Okay? So he said, "Then Ciratado, the demon from whose mouth two boar-like tusks protruded, made him feel how one of them could rip." So he uses his tusk. "The mouse, in truth, had come among some vicious cats." It's an interesting line. In other words, he's saying about Campolo that he's like a mouse that's been caught by all these cats. And still, Barbarica locked him in a tight embrace, saying, "Stand back while I enfork him well." But to my master, "Ask him what you please, if there is more you'd like to hear from him, before he's butchered by another of us." So my guide asked, "Among the sinners who swim under the pitch, are any others you know Italians?" So he asks Campolo, "Are there other Italians there?" And he said, "I parted with one who came from there just now. Would I were still below, hidden with him, for then I need not dread their hooks and talons." In other words, I wish I hadn't been caught. Then cried Ligaboco, "We have endured too much." So now we got the demons who are saying, you know, "We've enough with this silly talking. Come on, let us jack this guy." With that, he clawed his grapple into the other's arm, into Campolo's arm, and ripped out a muscle. So this is grotesque. This is horrifying, vicious stuff, right? Dragignoso also made as if he meant to give his legs a goring, at which their captain wheeled against them all. When they were somewhat quiet, without deferring his questions, my leader asked the sinner, who still was staring at his wound. Note the grotesqueness of this exchange. So you got this sinner who's being caught up by these demons. He's just being filleted, torn apart, and Virgil wants to have a conversation with him about who else is down there, right? The ironies run deep here, no question, right? And now Virgil will ask, "Who was it you said you parted from when you did yourself such ill by coming ashore?" Virgil's not interested in the pain that Capello is experiencing. And now he'll mention another one, never seen but mentioned. "Fra Gomita," he replied, "he of Giulia." Now, this is the Sardinian friar who was chancellor to the judge Nico Viscount of Pisa. He ended up being hanged for barratry as well. "Vessel of every deceit, who kept the enemies that his master had so cunningly in hand." They praised him for it. "He took their cash and sent them on their way smoothly," as he recounts, and apparently even let prisoners go if they would pay him off. "And he was great in other enterprises equally," the satire continues to abound. "No petty berater, but a lordly one." In other words, he did a very fine job of it. And then Don Michel Sanchi of Logodoro, who was murdered in 1275, by the way, by Banaco de Herrera. We're going to see him in Canto 33, so put that one in your notes. And this one apparently replaced Gomita and was even worse. And he keep company together down there when they go on about Sardinia. Their tongues don't tire. They love to talk about Sardinia. But, oh me, look at how that other demon is grinding his teeth. In other words, I appreciate that you want information, but dude, I'm really worried I'm about to get shredded here. Though I would tell you more, I fear he's getting ready to scratch my itch, right? To Farfaleo, whose eyes rolled eager for gore, their marshal turned and shouted his reproach, "Get back, vile bird." We're going to see demons flying in a second. The sinner now will continue. "If you would hear Tuscans or Lombards, there are some I can fetch. But let the Malabranca stand back there, so those who come will not fear their revenge, and I will make some 7 souls appear for the lone one that I am." In other words, if you let me go back down below, I'll bring you 7 back, so you don't have to just talk to one. And I won't change my place from where I sit, but summon them by whistling, so we do when we can emerge. In other words, I'll whistle to them. But Cagnazzo raises his muzzle at this claim, shaking his head from side to side. He said, "Just listen to this cunning trick. His aim is to jump back below." So you get kind of, dumb demons or whatever, goofy kind of silly types. And he, who had a great supply of wiles at his command, replied, "It's true that I am cunning indeed at contriving greater sorrows for the band I dwell with." In other words, yeah, you're right. I'm going to go down. I'm going to sell out even. Notice, in other words, berators will sell out anybody for money. This is Dante's point. We then have Alcino, who will hold himself back in no longer. He can't hold himself any no longer, and he opposed the others. "My friend," he said, "if you dare plunge back in again, I'll not come merely galloping after you, but beating my wings above the pitch. In other words, I'll fly out over the pitch and I'll jack you. The screen formed by the bank will hide us when we go down from this ridge. We'll see if you alone are a match for all of us." And then we get Dante the poet. "Oh, reader, hear now of a new sport, led by the very one who first opposed it all, now turned their eyes to the other shore." This is Cagnazzo. Timing exactly when, feet firm against the ground, the Navarrese suddenly leapt. So Campillo is going to jump and instantly broke free out of their custody. In other words, they get away. So he gets away, right? In other words, Virgil and Dante ostensibly allow this prisoner to get away so that he's not tortured anymore. Each demon at this felt stung by his misdoing, especially he who caused the blunder. So crying out, "You're caught!" he flew away in pursuit, but futilely. Wings could not gain on terror. Down out of sight the sinner dove, and the demon swooped back up, raising his breast, no different in his flight than when the wild duck makes a sudden escape by diving just as the falcon plummets close, then veers back up, vexed at his thwarted grip. Notice, you could do worse in Inferno. Then you simply go through and mark every time an animal or some kind of non-human life form is referenced, and how it often is in the form of similes, in the same way that a duck barely gets away from the falcon, if you will. Camillo gets away, right? Then, we're told, Calabrina, who was furious the trick had worked, went flying after the pair, eager to see the sinner evade the chase, so there could be a fight. When the berater had disappeared, the demon turned his claws upon his comrade, so now you have Calabrina versus Cagnazzo, so you got these two demons going at each other, upon his comrade, and grappled him in midair above the fosse. So in other words, now they're fighting the demons over the black pitch. But his opponent was a full-grown hawk, equipped with claws to respond truly and well. And as they fought, so the two are fighting, the brace fell into the middle of the boiling pond. So down they fall into the pitch themselves. So note the humor of this and the irony of this, the comedy of this, if you will. So you've got these really fierce demon types who are now fighting each other, and then they fall into the black pit themselves. The heat unclinched them at once, but though released, they could not rise because their wings were gummed and clotted. In other words, they got tar all over them. The one in charge in Barbarixia, like the rest, lamenting, hastily dispatched a squad of 4 who flew across to the bank we faced, each with a fork. Hurrying from either side, they descended to their posts with hooks extended to the mired pair, already baked inside their crusts, and we too left them thus, confounded. It's funny that at the very end, this will be the distraction that Virgil and Dante need to be able to escape. Well, you can see, obviously, the silliness of this by the end. Dante, you get the sense Dante's having a bit of fun, right? Well, let's work level 2 and 3 really quickly. At 2A, well, again, demons are silly as well as gross and vicious. Obviously gross with all their sticking out of the tongues and the fart jokes and all of that. Another major message here, and I think it shouldn't be overlooked, is this very subtle suggestion that God is way more powerful than demons and the fallen angels, right? Of course, another major message here, although the Barbiters, we really don't have much comment about who they are. By the way, this is a truth about Inferno. It's amazing how little actually of sinners we have in Inferno itself. It's more about the kinds of punishments that they receive, etc., etc. But notice, misusing power, one of the major ones here, is worse than all of the previous sins that we've encountered. Remember, when we're in Inferno and you're going down into Inferno, the worse the sins, the farther down you go. And arbitrary, grafting, and evil corrupted politicians. Notice it always seems to come back to some use of abuse of money for Dante. At 2B, the symbolism, well, obviously demons here, they're scary and silly at the same time, faces of evil. In other words, if you're a good person, demons and evil are nothing to be frightened of. That's the subtle message Dante is sending. The irony, of course, is again, Satan's followers are gross and silly and not to be feared in the end. Well, you can think about Dante as poet again here. It's almost as if Dante as poet wants to kind of play games now in the middle and say, let's liven this up a bit. We definitely have some satire here that we haven't seen elsewhere earlier in Inferno. Dante as politician, one more time, this time for the Navarrese, he is making that observation that you want to know what takes us all down? It's, of course, the lust for money, right? Dante as philosopher, well, it's an interesting kind of thing. You know, we have that saying, the devil you know is better than the devil that you don't. Notice here, as philosopher, Dante is playing around with a very interesting game. What is to be feared once you've turned the light on and you know that there's nothing really there to be feared? What is to be feared from demons who salute each other by farting, right? It's humorous, it's comic, if you will. At 3A, well, right, the silliness of demons reminds us of the silliness of gods in the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, right? Think about that. I mean, we could go back and we could look at the moments in the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid when you have gods and goddesses who are kind of doing really silly things in anthropomorphic ways, right? Also at 3A, Paradise Lost, write this down. We're going to come back to this in the fallen demons, the fallen angels, the demons in Pandemonium, the city that they create. They're digging in the ground with their rumps sticking up. It's going to remind us of this, as well as Aristophanes, the clouds, where you will have philosophers with their rumps in the air as they're looking towards the stars. Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings films, you'll maybe recall, especially in that final one, The Return of the King, you often will have, especially those guards at Mordor, those demon-type guards, they are gross and they're frightening, but they're also sometimes really, really dumb and silly. Clearly, we're playing with the same game here. Finally, at 3B, what was the time something scary became something silly for you? I mean, think about that. And a lot of you will say it happened when you were a child and you thought it was scary and then it was something silly. And of course, we're kind of playing a game here for Dante. The Pilgrim is, in fact, going from childlike mentality to a more mature mentality by the time he gets through Purgatorio to Paradiso. He grows up, spiritually speaking, we might say. What was a time that you saw someone, as the berators will do, misuse power, and you really felt appalled by that? They had power, and then they misused it in some way. A student once saying, it reminds me of a coach that I had once who made a decision not about who gets played or whatever because of ability, but rather because of family name, and the family had in fact made some arrangements with the coach financially, and so the coach went ahead and allowed it to happen. And this player, this athlete, knew about it, and it was really offensive to her. Okay, let's turn, that's Cantos 21, 22 as a unit. Let's turn now to Canto 23, where actually this story actually finally comes to its ending. But we're also going to see the hypocrites here. Okay, Dante's going to save some very interesting stuff in Bolgia number 6 for the hypocrites. And we're going to have more jacking on the church with the jovial friars. I hope, speaking of jovial, I hope you enjoyed some of the comedy within the Commedia. Thank you.